So let's get rid of this CSS and start from scratch here, because that is just more of a demo than anything really good looking. So if we look at our HTML, we have some pretty specific things that we need to take care of here in terms of styling. And because we spent some time organizing our HTML, it should make our CSS a little bit easier. So first and foremost, we have our body element. And we're going to apply some styles to this. I'm going to show you guys how to do a really basic positioning, essentially, or really basic layout using the body element. Then we've got this main H1, which is our main site heading. And then we have a section, which is the main section of the page, and it has the ID recipes. And then within that section, we have only a single article here, but eventually a series of articles which constitute the recipes. So we have a pretty clear structure in terms of what we need to style. So let's first start out with the layout. So if we go back over to our CSS and create a new rule for the body, what we want to do is we want to give this site a fixed width. Right now it has a what's called a fluid layout, meaning that the content in block elements will expand and contract depending on the size of the browser window. What we want to do is make this fixed so that no matter how big the browser is, our site remains the same width. And this has some advantages and disadvantages. Some advantages is that we are in a little bit more control over the dimensions of our site. We can control how things look a little bit better on the page. A disadvantage is our site isn't very flexible. It can't expand to different screen sizes or even down to mobile. So it has some drawbacks. But for this example, I think it's going to be just fine. So let's make this a pretty narrow site. Let's just do a 600 pixel width for right now and save that. And let's refresh and see what that does. So now you can see here, and if we bring up our inspector, you can see that the body is only, whoops, I can't get it. Well, anyway, you can see it there, that the body is set to 600 pixels wide. So the problem, though, is it is left justified, and I don't want it justified up against this edge of the browser window. What I want is for it to be centered. So what we use is a margin trick. It's not really a trick, it's just an interesting little bit of code that will keep your site centered. And the property is margin, and we use the 0 auto values. And what this really is 0 auto, 0 auto. But each of these, but if we have the same two pairs, like the same pair like this, we can just write one. And so this is essentially top, bottom, left, and right. And what this does, if you save it and you come over here and refresh, you'll see that it now centers your site on the page. Because what it's doing is it is setting an automatic margin on each side of our body with a width of 600. And remember, if you think about our box model, the margins on the very outside. So what that's going to do is that's going to compress all of our content in to that 600 pixel width. And what we end up with is a nice centered page. So then now we could do something like use a background color. And now we have a, whoops, that is not what I wanted to do. Actually, yeah, that is what I wanted to do. But the problem here is I want to isolate that background just so it's on either side of our 600 pixel site. So what I need to do is come into our HTML and add one more element. And that's going to be a div. And we're just going to call this container. Now what this div is going to do is it's going to act as a wrapper inside of my body to contain all of this content. So now we'll leave background on body, but we're going to move this width and margin to the container. And now let's save that and see what we have. All right, so our positioning has stayed the same, but now hopefully if we put a background on here, we'll get, there we go. So now this is starting to come together. So a few things I'm noticing here. First of all, we have this extra space at the top, which I don't like. So maybe we can use our web inspector in Chrome to see what that is. So if we hover over here, you can see that that looks like padding or margin on the H1. And if we click it, you can see that that's actually adding some top and bottom margin. So what we want to do is we want to add a global rule for all of our H1 elements and zero out the margin. So now if we come back over here and refresh, now you can see that it's closer. Now there's still something else going on up here. And I bet that's in, yep, it looks like our body has a margin all the way around it. So what we can do here is add another margin 0 to get rid of that. Now, just a quick side note here. As we progress through the semester, we're going to be doing a lot of this type of design. And you're going to find yourself resetting a lot of these values quite often. You're always mostly going to want to make all the headings have a 0 margin. You're going to want to change a lot of this stuff. And it's kind of annoying to have to retype all this all the time. So once we get a little further along, I'll introduce you guys to reset style sheets or default style sheets so that you can have all of these things kind of set up before you get started. It'll just make things a little bit easier. So our site recipe page is starting to come together pretty well. One thing I don't like is to have the content pushed right up against our border here. We want to give that content a little bit of space, but I want to be careful of how I do this because we might want to do some styling up on the H1. So for the time being, let's add a 15 pixel padding to our page. So now you can see it spreads it out a little bit and gives us a little bit of space for that content to breathe. So everything's not so crammed in there. It's not suffocating. So one last thing we could maybe do just to make things look nice is add a top border to our body. Let's see what that looks like. Whoops. Got to tell it what kind of border. There we go. Maybe a little darker. There, that's better. Okay. So we, just by adding these 3 style rules, and don't forget our extra class container, we've turned this recipe page in. It looks a little bit better now. It's a little more organized. It's not so spread all over the page. We have some nice separation between our background and our main content area, and we've added a nice little border to the top. So I wouldn't say this is going to win any design awards, but it is a good first step. So move on to the next video, and we'll continue adding to this recipe page.